All right, cool. So we should probably begin.
Of course.
Happy to kick off with some questions, Rand, if you're all good and ready to go. I'm guessing you have been ready for a while now.
I'm ready to go. Just the protocol for these Google Hangouts is kind of weird. You got to kind of sit and wait for a while, and then you wait till it's official, and you go live, and then you wait a little longer, and then you're ready. So I'm ready.
Cool. All right. Well, I thought that I'd probably start with kind of like the making of Myst, and obviously probably start with the HyperCard and working back in the days of the Mac. The first sort of interactive storybook game that you guys created was the Manhole. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was really kind of the breakthrough uh, the breakthrough product. That was, I guess, different, compared to what was around. And from there, I think everything evolved. So yeah, that was our first product, done in
Cool.
HyperCard.
Yeah, so I mean that's a pretty, I guess, a different sort of development tool. For people that don't know, what exactly was HyperCard and how was it like different to everything else out there, and what made it, I guess, suitable for making sort of like a game experience?
Oh man, you're going to get me talking for a long time now. This is going to be a long hangout if we're going to talk about HyperCard. So HyperCard is one of these great enabling technologies. It was such a weird thing. I don't, it'd be hard for anyone but Apple or a large computer developer to just kind of do that out of the goodness of their heart, because I don't know that you could make a lot of money on it. But it was such a revolutionary tool because it 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 was an amazing development engine hiding behind just like a stack of cards interface. And so it had these great levels like an onion that you could peel away. And at the first level, it felt like, oh, I'll put recipe cards in HyperCard. And then you could dig a little deeper and realize that you could link the cards together, and you could have hot links to it, and there would be, other little animations you could create with it. And then as you got deeper and deeper into it, you realized there was this very rich and forgiving language behind it, appropriately called HyperTalk, that allowed you to write script and control the cards and the pieces of the cards and the elements of the cards and put movies on the cards, and essentially gave you a development environment that all the while was hiding under this kind of deck of cards kind of metaphor. And so it enabled, uh, well, we'll put it this way: it enabled small children in school to write apps and cool little programs that actually worked. And I know that because my kids all used it to do things. And maybe that is just how great of a programmer I am. I needed a development system that children could use. So it also had some, beyond all of what I've said, it also had things called extensions where you could write your own really low-level library functions and commands to extend it even further. But at its base, it was a link of it was cards that were linked together, and so you can see obviously where Myst kind of evolved from that idea as well.
Was Myst actually started on HyperCard, or was created with HyperCard?
It was, yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
We did the Manhole. You mentioned that one. That was a children's program that my brother hand drew each image, and we were actually going to start that out, as I've said this a few times, as a book, where each page would have these interactive elements, and you would, people have done that. I think Living Books did it at some point. But what happened was we just didn't turn the page. The first page of the fire hydrant and the manhole ended up being more interesting to go deeper and explore the world than it was to turn the page and find, and go somewhere else. And so that first page just turned into a world all of its own. And then obviously our worlds at some point started getting a little richer and more story. Cosmic Osmo was the second one, and we learned our lessons with the manhole and made Osmo a little more sophisticated and toyed a little with story and some little threads to tie things together. And then we did a game called Spelunks that was a little more educational, same thing. And then Myst, we used the same tools. We knew HyperCard, we knew what we could do. We were we were pretty good at it by then, and so we felt like it would fill the bill, but we just didn't hand draw the images. We decided to switch to CG rendering, so they looked photorealistic.
Cool. So with the CG rendering back, that would be the early 90s. I mean, now it's pretty. I guess anybody on their computer could, all within the same program, create a 3D environment. Not that it'll be any good, but create one, render it in 30 seconds, and then put it on YouTube 30 seconds after that. What was that whole process like in the 90s?
Oh boy, it was back in the old days. It was kind of crazy. Yeah, people wouldn't believe what we went through. The craziest part and the most interesting part was that we weren't in the same location. So my brother worked at his house, I worked at my house, and we had a couple other people working as well. And there was no internet fast enough to share images. So basically, the large images, we paid somebody who would drive discs back and forth to our homes on occasion. But the rendering part, which is interesting, is the part my brother did, Robin did, which we had this software that allowed us to make the 3D models and put textures on them. But for each image, and these were small images. I mean, they're like smaller than icons require nowadays. And so we had to render these images, and the images took up to as much as 6 hours for one single image on the computers we were using. So we had at some point we had a few computers, and they were all sitting there just churning, and my job was to keep feeding the beast with images to render. I just had to keep it running all the time, and there were times we thought it would never end. And but eventually, you got a few machines, you got 4 machines running and rendering day and night. It's surprising how many you get done. One of the things that was interesting is the small little animations on Myst. I mean, the flybys, which were some of the coolest things when you fly through the islands. We didn't have the computing power to do those full screen. There was just no way. You figure it's taking 4 or 5 hours per image, and we've got to do those at, I think we were doing 12 frames per second. And there was just no way we were going to get those done. So another reason they were kind of small and fit nicely in that whole book metaphor, that allowed us to render those at all.
Cool. So that would kind of explain like the bordered image for the actual main presentation of Myst as well.
Yeah.
That was basically as a technical limitation, or just to save time on rendering.
It was all a combination of both. I recently had a talk at NYU, and they asked about limitations of software design and development, and that's actually, a lot of people think that limitations are a bad thing. I think limitations are a really good thing, because if you embrace the box ahead of time, the box that you have to work in ahead of time, then you can design wisely within that box. Those limitations are what help you shape your product well. And so we knew that we weren't going to do full screen video. No computers could do that. So our box, the size of our box we were designing in, had small postage stamp videos, and we knew we had a fallback and could do that. So we just designed the environment and the story to fit those tiny little postage stamps. We knew that when we rode an elevator up and down, we couldn't see out the entire elevator door. We had to look through a small window, and we knew that when we saw people speaking to us, we had to see that through a small window. And so all that was kind of built into the story to help handle those limitations. But once again, I think that was a benefit. Just so we understood those ahead of time, and it actually helped us in the end.
So would you say then the inspiration for Myst, because obviously the Manhole and those sort of early experiences were like interactive storybooks or children's books or that sort of thing, would the main inspiration have been, like books or novels or things like that, as opposed to other mediums for your game creation in those days?
It's interesting. I honestly think that the main this is another thing we discussed at NYU. This was an interesting little track, because I was speaking there. actually with John Romero. It's the 20th anniversary of Doom and the 20th anniversary of Myst, which was a really
Can't get
interesting talk
can't
to
get
sit
more
down
two
with
different
John
games than that.
Romero. Yeah, yeah, so different, you know. And but it was amazing because at one point he said that um, uh, he and John Carmack had been playing, or they had been playing John Carmack's dungeon in D&D, and John Carmack had written this dungeon, and it was full of hallways and monsters and that kind of thing, and so they decided they would make that in Doom. I mean, they just were kind of liked the idea of D&D hallways and dungeons, and that's kind of where Doom came from. And I turned to him and I said, well, that's crazy, because a lot of the inspiration for Myst came from early experience playing D&D with my brothers, but I didn't like the uh, the hallways and the monsters and the dice rolling. I liked exploring outdoors and going from one interesting place to another and solving puzzles. And so my first chance, I did a dungeon that wasn't a dungeon. It was this cool looking castle that had all these mysterious doors that were a little hard to open, and a dead guy in front, and there was no dice rolling. It was just you and a group of people trying to figure out how to get into this place and what was on the inside. And so we both were inspired by that D&D experience of exploring worlds, but in two different, very, very different forks that both worked well. So that's a long way around saying that D&D had definitely had an effect on both of those.
I think it all goes back to D&D. It seems for every
yeah,
for every game.
amazingly.
It is pretty amazing, especially for something like Myst, which is like from my perspective would be like something that kind of captures the feeling of exploration and discovery, which I guess is what has endeared it to a lot of fans. But I guess going on a different direction, after you guys made Manhole and a few other those titles, you had trouble, from my understanding, actually getting funding or for Myst. No publishers really wanted to make it. What was the original pitch for Myst, if you could remember it all? I mean, how was it? How were you trying to sell it? That they said, no, we don't want that. That sounds crap. That's not going to sell 100 million thousand copies.
yeah, that's well, that question's loaded as well. The interesting thing was that we knew at some point, my brother and I knew that at some point we would do a product for an older audience. You know, these children's games were getting more and more sophisticated, and so in our minds we thought, well, we can see where this is going. And we came up with an early design for something we called a Gray Summons. And it was definitely for an older audience, and it involved kind of traveling into a painting on the wall, which we thought would be fun. And anyway, I won't go into the details of that, but we took that to only a couple people. And granted, our idea of proposals was not what proposals are today. We didn't even know what proposals were. I mean, we kind of pulled
You didn't
ourselves
have
up.
pie charts, business plans, sales projections,
Exactly.
those sort of things.
Right. You have to understand, we had pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and kind of funded, our first product, the Manhole, and used the proceeds from it to do the second one, and the proceeds from that one to do the third one. So we weren't necessarily pitching these things to publishers. So, it came time to do this for an older audience. So we put together a small little thing that demoed it and took it to a couple of publishers, and they said, we don't get this. And we were like, okay, that's all right. We'll keep going with where we're going. We were very patient, I guess, and very naive.